morning. My name is Brenna Rubio, and I'm our Missional Life Director here at New Life Church, which basically means I help us as a congregation focus on all the ways we can reach out to the people who aren't here with us this morning. It includes things like our weekly food distribution that weekly serves 150 to 200 families. It also includes things like our members in missions, and so I'm so excited that we got to celebrate Linda and her step of faith this morning. I'm really excited to be here this morning and to be talking with you about the story of the prodigal son. It's the second in a 3-week series that we're doing on this famous passage found in Luke 15, all about a story of redemption and forgiveness. But I got to tell you, I faced a little challenge this week, a little blow to my confidence. I'd been preparing for the sermon, and in the middle of this preparation, I had a chance to go on a walk on the beach with my 7-year-old daughter. And she asked me about my sermon I was prepping. And so I started telling her about it as I'm talking. Her face gets more and more concerned until finally she reaches out and grabs me and says, "Mom, you're telling the story wrong. This is not the story that I find in my children's Bible." I said, I see the problem. Because she's right. She was absolutely right. I was not telling her the story of the prodigal son that she had found in her children's Bible. You see, this picture up here, it's a famous picture by Rembrandt, The Return of the Prodigal Son. There are 2 main characters in that picture, and 2 main characters in the story that we often tell. There's the son who you see kneeling in front of his father. This is a son who wandered far, far away, and he came back and he found forgiveness. And that's the story that our pastor Juno told you last week. It's a part of the story. Because you'll notice in the picture, way off in the the background, you can hardly see him. He's so obscured by shadow. There's another character in the story. There's the character of the elder brother. It's kind of the story behind the story. It's the subtext. And that's the part of this great story that we're going to focus on this morning. So would you just pray with me before we get started? God, we confess as we come here this morning, we do not always take the time just to sit in your word. We do not always take the time just to listen to you. But God, we believe that you have something to say to us this morning. We believe that you have a word for each one of us as we sit here today. A word of grace, a word of courage, a word that is going to change us. We're not going to leave here just the same way we came in. So God, open our eyes, open our ears, open our minds, that we would listen to you, we would love you, we would let you change us. Amen. Well, this morning as we think about why it is that we need to focus on this shadowy figure, this elder brother, one of the places we're going to start is by asking, who exactly was Jesus telling this story of the lost son, the prodigal son, to? Because that's kind of important sometimes, right? If you take a passage out of context, you might not really get what it is that you're supposed to be understanding, what it is that you're supposed to be getting out of the conversation that you're having. So Jesus wasn't just telling the story into a vacuum. He was telling the story to some specific people. And to understand that, to understand who he was talking to, we have to take one step back further, and we have to talk about something very important. We have to talk about parties. Everybody here likes parties, right? I like that. I can't do it justice, but that was a good little whoop-whoop. We all love parties. There's nothing better than getting invited to a party, right? How many of you have been invited to a party in the last year? Everybody should be raising their hand, because even a couple weeks ago, we had a barbecue here, and you were all invited. There's nothing better than being invited to a party. It means different things to some of us. If you're in your 20s, maybe a party means clubbing. If you're a little bit older than that, maybe it means having a game night at your house. A group of ladies in my neighborhood, they love getting together to play bunco. That's a party. It could be a backyard barbecue. That's a party. There are parties with kind of the uppercase P, and then there are the lowercase p parties. But parties are an important part of life because they're one of the ways that we just get together and we connect with people. And one of the things that I love about Jesus is that he was into parties. I mean, think about it. His first miracle, he was at a party. He turned water into wine, the good stuff. He was into parties. He told stories about parties all the time. Even the passages that we're going to look at today were all about parties. I even think sometimes when I read the passages and he's out teaching in these open-air places and all these people are coming and he does some miracles and all of a sudden they have fish and they have bread to eat starting from 5 loaves and 5 fishes. I mean, it was a great big party that he was throwing. And all the time we see in stories about Jesus that he loves to just sit and eat with people, those little mini parties. Commentators would suggest that this is really natural and normal for him, because in the culture that he was living in the Middle East around the 1st century, one of the primary values for people living in that time really was hospitality. How do you welcome in people? How do you invite them in and connect with them? And I taste this a little pretty frequently, actually. One of my next door neighbors is from the Middle East. And one of the things I love about going to visit Janet is that I know if I stop by just to ask her a question, it's never going to just be a 1 minute, us hanging out at the front door kind of thing. It's going to be her inviting me and the kids inside, and she's going to put on a pot of coffee, and she's going to raid her cupboards, and she's going to pull out the cookies, or if she doesn't have anything else, she's going to make a bag of popcorn. But we're going to have a little party when I go and I visit Janet. So in the passage that we're looking at today, it starts off with Jesus having one of those little parties. He's sitting and he's eating with people. And so we're going to look at that passage in Luke 15. Now all the tax collectors and the sinners were coming near to him to listen to him. And both the Pharisees and the scribes began to grumble, saying, "This man receives sinners, and he eats with them." So notice there are 2 different types of people that Jesus is hanging out with at the beginning of this story. There are sinners, which basically just means the people who, for different reasons, were outside of the religious structure, the Jewish religious structure of his time. They weren't accepted. They weren't clean. And those are the people Jesus was sitting with and enjoying time with. And then there were Pharisees. And they were the religious leaders. They had very strict religious rules. They were strict about following themselves, telling other people that they needed to follow them. And these really are the party crashers of the story. I can just imagine how they're just kind of sitting off on the side and they're acting as if they don't want Jesus to hear them, but really, they want him to hear. It's a little passive-aggressive. Let me give you just a little bit of a clearer picture. I want to show you a more modern reenactment of what the difference between the Pharisees and the sinners could look like. And so we're going to watch just the beginning of the movie Les Mis. It's the beginning, so don't worry if you haven't seen it. We're not giving anything away. I look at Javert, that officer of the law, and he is such an excellent representation of the Pharisee. It was all about rules. And you could just see the contempt that he felt as he looked at this prisoner, this man who had made mistakes, and he had no mercy, only judgment. It was all about the law. And so I could geek out really, really hard here on Les Mis and, just kind of how this is such an incredible modern-day parable. If you haven't seen the movie, you should watch it. See the themes of grace you can find in there, and I got to leave it there. But that's our Pharisee. And what's interesting as we look at this passage is that's actually who Jesus is talking to. So often we read all the story of the lost son, the prodigal son, and we think Jesus is talking to the prodigal sons, the sinners. He's talking to the Pharisees. They're the ones who are complaining to Jesus, and they're the ones that he's responding to as he begins to tell the next 3 famous parables of the lost. And so knowing that, what it does is it tells us that we might want to read those parables a little bit differently. We might want to try and imagine, kind of like that old game, Where's Waldo? Where's the Pharisee in this story? How is Jesus talking to them specifically as we read the passages? So I'm going to go really quickly through the first 2 parables found in Luke 15. And if you haven't read Luke 15 in its entirety, I really encourage you to do that sometime this week. Just sit with it. It's fun. It's good. Sit with it. Let God talk to you as you read through it. But the first 2 parables are kind of warm-ups. They're preludes to the main story, the story of the lost, the prodigal son. And so there's a first story where Jesus talks about a shepherd who's lost one of his sheep. He has 99 that are in the pen, but there's just one that wandered far away. And he says, of course, isn't that shepherd going to go after that sheep? And when he finds him, isn't he going to come back and throw a party and get all of his friends to come and celebrate? And then he looks at the Pharisees as he's talking with them, and he says, I tell you that in the same way, there will be more joy in heaven over one sinner who repents than over 99 righteous persons who need no repentance. He's looking at these Pharisees, and of course they're the 99 righteous, right? And he's saying, you think I should throw a party for you because you're staying in the fold. I'm telling you that what I throw a party for is repentance. And I don't see that in your lives. How do you think they felt about that? Well, I'm thinking that started to ruffle some feathers. And then he goes on and tells another story. He talks about a woman who loses a coin. She has 9 others, but if she loses one inside her home, isn't she just going to start turning over all the furniture, ripping into everything until she finds that one coin she lost? And wouldn't you expect her to be so excited that she throws a party and invites all of her friends to come and to rejoice? Now, I got to tell you, that one's a little tricky. Where's the Pharisee in that story? I think he might be there, but we're going to come back to it a little bit later. And then finally, he comes to the story of the lost son. And we're going to read this text together. It's a little long, but we're going to read it in full this morning, because what I want to ask you to do is to remember this time, as we read the story, that there is an elder son. And I want you to try and imagine, where is he in the story? What's his perspective as you listen, even if we're not specifically talking about him? For some of you, it might actually help even if you close your eyes as we read, but just listen and see if you can see where the older son, the Pharisee, comes in. So there was a young son, and he said, Father, give me the share of the property that will belong to me. A few days later, the younger son gathered all he had and traveled to a distant country, and there he squandered his property in dissolute living. When he had spent everything, a severe famine took place throughout that country, and he began to be in need. So he went, and he hired himself out to one of the citizens of that country, who had sent him to his fields to feed the pigs. He would gladly have filled himself with the pods that the pigs were eating, and no one gave him anything. But when he came to himself, he said, how many of my father's hired hands have bread enough and to spare? But here I am, dying of hunger. I will get up and go to my father, and I will say to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and before you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Treat me like one of your hired hands. So he set off and went to his father. But while he was still far off, his father saw him and was filled with compassion. He ran out and put his arms around him, and he kissed him. And then the son said to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and before you. I'm no longer worthy to be called your son. But the father said to his slaves, Quickly, bring out a robe, the best one, and put it on him. Put a ring on his finger, sandals on his feet, and get the fatted calf and kill it, and let us eat and celebrate. Let's have a party. For this son of mine was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found. And they began to celebrate. Now his older son was in the field, and as he came and drew near to the house, he heard music and dancing. And he called one of the servants and asked him what these things meant. And he said to him, Your brother has come, and your father has killed the fatted calf, because he has received him and his life. He was angry and refused to go in. His father came out and entreated him, but he answered his father, Look, these many years I've served you, and I never disobeyed your command. Yet you never gave me a young goat that I might celebrate with my friends. But when this son of yours came, who had devoured your property with prostitutes, you killed the fattened calf for him. And he said to him, Son, you are always with me, and all that's mine is yours. It was fitting to celebrate and be glad, for this your brother was dead and is alive. He was lost, now he's found. I want to notice a few things about this older brother together. And the first one, I think, is pretty obvious. He's kind of sympathetic. I mean, a lot of us, we hear this story, and we were feeling good for the younger brother. It was great that he found forgiveness. But when we start listening to the older brother, I think a lot of us kind of have this inner feeling. Maybe you don't want to say out loud because you're afraid you'll come off as unspiritual or something. But you're kind of going, man, he's got a point. He was there. He was doing the work. He was following the rules. He never got a calf slaughtered in his honor. I think we all feel this way sometimes. We look at how we're doing, and then we start to compare it to how other people are doing, and there is this part of us that sometimes looks at God and says, God, really? What's the deal? Don't you love me? Don't you hear me? Don't you see all that I am doing for you? Where's my reward? I didn't get that promotion. My marriage is in trouble. My kids aren't making the choices that I wanted them to make. The disease isn't cured. You didn't give me that baby that I was hoping for. Things aren't happening the way that I want them to. And we struggle. See, we live in this quid pro quo kind of world where we think, hey, you scratch my back and I'll scratch yours. And it's really, really hard for us not to take that into our relationship with God. We think we've made a deal. There are rules that we're supposed to follow, and we tend to use the Bible like that sometimes. Hey, here's my rule book. And I think if I follow these rules, I expect a certain reward. Sometimes we don't even know that we're expecting it until we get disappointed. And that anger that comes up, that resentment, is what clues us into the fact that we feel like God has let us down. He didn't follow his part of the bargain. It's normal. It makes sense why it happens, and yet it's not the best that God has for us. And here's some clues that we have to be aware of so that we can tell if we're slipping into this kind of Pharisaical elder brother kind of attitude. We start to lack gratitude. We think that we deserve all the good things that happen to us, and when we don't get them, we feel betrayed. Compare the attitude of the older brother to the younger son who, when he's coming back, is saying, I don't even deserve to be a slave anymore. He didn't expect to be received as a son. He barely expected to be received as a slave. But the elder son, he felt entitled. He didn't feel gratitude. We might be slipping into Phariseeism if we're having a lack of compassion. For myself, I call it when I'm getting judgy. I get judgy sometimes, and I can feel it in myself. I'm starting to look at other people and saying, you're making choices I would not make. And then if bad things happen to them, well, maybe they deserved it. I'm not proud of that, but I think we all do it sometimes. They're making choices we wouldn't make, and we look down our noses. And it's hard for us to feel compassion and to believe that they deserve second chances just as much as we do. A third clue that you might be slipping into Phariseeism is a lack of joy. The elder brother's talking to his father, and the way he describes his work, he says, basically, if we translated it a little bit more literally, I've been slaving for you for all these years. He saw his work as slavery. Where's the joy in that? How about you in your lives? When you're doing these right things, are you joyful about it? Or are you going through the motions? I catch myself sometimes and I'm thinking, man, if people knew how tired I was in this moment, they wouldn't want to have anything to do with the Jesus that I'm serving. We need joy. We're not called to be slaves. What I get from this story, and what I hope you get from this story this morning, is there is more than one way to be lost. And there is more than one lost son in this story. In fact, some scholars, when they read these three parables all together, suggest that in the first parable, the parable of the sheep who wanders far away, we see a parallel to the younger son. He went far away in his rejection of the father. But in the story of the lost coin, we see the older son. We see the Pharisee. Because you can be lost even if you never leave the house. You can be lost right inside your own home. And so it was obvious how the younger son was rejecting his father, right? You know, he was very, very clear about his rejection of his father. But the older son was quietly rejecting him the whole time because he was trading a joy-filled relationship with his father where he worked alongside him out of love, unity, purpose, for working alongside him as a slave. until finally things blow up, and he rejects him by refusing to come inside the party. And remember what we said at the beginning. In this particular culture, hospitality is one of the greatest values that they had. So it's not that he was just supposed to come inside the party and hang out, be a guest, shake his brother's hand, hey, it's cool, you're home. It's not what he was being asked to do. He was supposed to come in and host the party with his father. He's the older brother. He's supposed to help throw the party. And it was embarrassing to his father. It was a rejection when he refused to even come inside. So there's more than one way to be lost, but there's really only one way to be found. Because the father goes outside to meet his older son just like he did for his younger son. He never makes us grovel or beg, right? Wherever we are, God comes to meet us. And what I love about this part of the story is, so often when we think about Jesus and the Pharisees are the bad guys, right? And it's always this kind of like tension and kind of challenging interactions that Jesus has with the Pharisees. But the Pharisees really aren't the bad guys. In fact, a lot of times, we're the Pharisees. And this part of the story is so tender towards them. Jesus cares that the Pharisees are lost. Jesus cares for how we're lost when we're being the Pharisees. And so the father leaves the party and he goes out to his older son and he says, "Son, you've always been with me and all that's mine is yours. You want a party, you only had to ask. Every day that we're together could be a party. We had to celebrate and rejoice, for this brother of yours was dead and has begun to live. He was lost and now he's found." And I want to suggest that what he's saying here really goes something like this. Child, I really have to ask you, is being the guest of honor really what it's all about? Is that the point? Is it even the position of most honor? I'm offering you the chance to co-host joyfully alongside me. I'm giving you the chance to help throw the party. Which is really the bigger blessing? And that's where the story ends. It ends on this cliffhanger. What is the older brother going to decide? What are the Pharisees going to decide? What are we going to decide? In those moments where we can tell we're slipping into the older brother role. So much of it depends on grace. Do we know that we need it? I think a lot of times we're like, I'm here, I'm good, I've been following the rules. We all need it. I need it. We're all screwed up still in different ways. There's still parts of our hearts that need the gospel. We're here just by grace. Jesus is the example. He's the example of the older brother that we want to be. Listen to the joy in this passage about our older brother. For both he who sanctifies and those who are sanctified are all from one Father, for which reason he is not ashamed to call them brethren, brothers and sisters, saying, I will proclaim your name to my brethren in the midst of the congregation. I will sing your praise. And then in Luke 19, for the Son of Man has come to seek and to save that which is lost. There are lost people in this room. There are lost people out of this room, all the way over in Benin. And Jesus came to save them all. He came to throw the party for all of them, and he invites us to do that with him. So as we end today, I actually want to invite up Demi Harima, who's our office administrator, and she's nervous, so give her a big hand of applause, encourage her. And Demi's coming up because we are having a seminar next Saturday. It's called Organic Outreach. And I want you to know we are changing the time of that seminar, so I hope you're planning on coming, and it's going to be later in the afternoon out of respect for Wanda has his family and her services. But we've been going through, in advance, as a staff team, the Organic Outreach training, because we're not going to ask you guys to do anything that we're not doing ourselves. And so we've had 2 of these sessions, and I asked Demi to come up and share a little bit about her experience. But first I have to ask her, just because I know, she does a lot of hard work, and some of you might want to encourage her sometime in the work that she's doing. So Demi, if someone wanted to encourage you, what's your favorite candy or treat?
Oh, man. So a Wilhelmina, of course, or a Snickers.
Okay, a Snickers, or what was the other one?
Wilhelmina's?
Wilhelmina's. Do you guys know what that is? What is it?
It's a mint.
Okay, it's a mint. A mint called Wilhelmina or Snickers. So you want to encourage Demi.
We got some in the audience.
Okay.
See, there we go.
There you
some
go.
prime
Okay.
examples.
All right. I'm thinking, is she making this up? Okay, so the staff are required to come to this training, and you know you're not going to hurt my feelings. What was your first reaction?
Sheer and utter dread.
She was really excited.
I was. It was. The idea of outreach can be a very scary word for a few people who don't feel necessarily as confident in that side of their relationship. It's more of a very intimate in my house type of thing, not something I would go and just feel the confidence to talk to a stranger about.
Got it. So the idea of someone...
A seminar teaching you how to do that just seemed like you guys should do that with the congregation because they have a better chance of
Okay, so you just felt like, this is not me.
Correct.
Okay, and there are probably some of you who, when I say, hey, come to an organic outreach conference, you're saying, this is not me. But from our conversations, you actually ended up kind of enjoying it. So what was different than what you expected?
It was more of a natural conversation when we were all sitting there together. It wasn't Brenna teaching us how to talk to somebody the way we were supposed to Bible thump properly. But it was like an open conversation. You're allowed to have a different opinion or a different view on something, and it was just other people giving their 2 cents without it having to be worth a quarter.
Yeah, awesome. And I want to say that. I think that as church leaders, as leaders of mission, sometimes we've really done you guys a disservice. We've made you think that there is like one way to go out and love people for Jesus, one way to talk to people about Jesus, and there isn't. There's not one right way. And so I love it that came through in what we were doing together as staff. So I know that afterwards, like the very same night, 6 hours later, you ended up in a conversation with a couple friends who wouldn't call themselves Christ followers at this point. Right. And how did that go? How did it feel?
So, well, it all started with me showing them the booklet that we had made for this specific group, for this seminar. And I was really just looking for a compliment on how well I did on it. And so, which is a great way to get things started for a conversation. But by the time I was done, my neighbor and I were talking, and she's more of spiritual, not religious, is her way of describing herself. And she's great. She's a great person. By the time we were done and she had seen the book and like, what would you mean change 1 degree? What's that? And I'm like, well, I used like different examples. Like, okay, well, I don't necessarily talk to anybody. I'm very happy with being silent, sitting in my chair, and I try to sneak away instead of shaking hands during the greeting time with my son. Now, it's like, oh, okay, why don't you shake a few hands? Nothing changed in my world. I'm not having a heart attack or standing on stage talking in front of everybody. So it was like a very nice one tiny thing that you can do, but it changes someone's day and changes someone's atmosphere. And so for her, she was like, oh, okay, I could see that. That's not what I was, that wasn't my first impression of what you guys were going to be doing.
Awesome. So what would you say to anyone who's on the fence about coming to the seminar next Saturday?
I would definitely say come. Once you get past that first class, like by the time we were in the second one this past Thursday, I think I talked more than everybody. They're like, all right, Demi, pass the baton. Like, it's going to be okay. But it was good. It was a nice way to see there's different ways to go about outreach. Not everyone has, I was not given the gift. I could definitely not go to Benin or anything like that. But I can talk to my neighbor. And I do have, another job that I could see different areas where I can like just plant a seed or pop an idea out there that somebody can take that and grow from it and not have the bad, Christian experience that they feel that can happen when people try to outreach.
Awesome. Thanks, Demi. So that's really the closing encouragement today. I can't say it better than she did. It's not big stuff, guys. It's how do we throw the party? We're invited to be co-hosts. We're invited to take steps. Juno, our pastor, shared he's learning his neighbors' names. Some of the people on our staff team have talked about, just trying to transition from being the person who waves at her neighbors to being the person who takes 1 minute to ask a couple questions about how they're doing as she's walking to and from her car. For me, because, I want to live what I'm sharing with you guys too, I had a neighbor down the street, we didn't know their names. And I finally went and knocked on their door, left a note, and invited them to come roast some marshmallows in our backyard. And we didn't hear from them. And Friday, we lit the fire in faith. And a few minutes later, they came and they rang the doorbell, and we spent an hour getting to know this family we hadn't gotten to know before. Just, it's natural, it's simple. Don't let us tell you it's different. You're invited to be co-hosts. You live in grace. And that's what I want to pray for us this morning as we go out. God, help us just to live in the reality of your grace. Help us to live in joy. Help us to throw the parties, whether it's, the preschool graduation that happened this week here on campus, the barbecue that we threw to celebrate baptisms and confirmations, the things that we do just naturally with our neighbors, our coworkers, the people who sit next to us, in the bleachers when we're watching our kids' games. God, you called us to love. You didn't give us this grace just for ourselves. You gave this grace to us so that we can give it to others. God, be with us this morning. Be with us throughout these next weeks as we learn to walk in that grace. There are response stations for you this morning. You can continue in prayer in your seats. You could come up and light a candle. You could take communion. However you want to do business with God right now, take that time.